We download our perceptions and beliefs about life years before we acquire the capacity for critical thinking. I was like, hello. Just sitting down to film my latest video, but I've got a new book delivery, which I tried to do one of those fancy unboxing book reveals, and I realised I hadn't hit record because I'm not much of an amateur. But anyway, I'll show you what I got, because it's quite exciting. Got it from World of Books, and it is The Mixed Race Experience, Reflections and Revelations on Multicultural Identity, so I'm really excited to get into that. That is not the book we are talking about today. Today we are going to be talking about Gabor Mate's The Myth of Normal. If you watched either my last video or the one before that, you would have seen that I was partway through reading it and I've now finished it. If you are a human being living in a society, I would strongly recommend you read the whole of this book, because it was just amazing. Like, I made so many notes through it. However, I appreciate it is quite a big book, and like, you know, who of us has the time to do that sort of thing? So I have gone through and distilled for you everything that Gabor Mate says in this book about education or the school system, or anything that I think relates to it in some way. It is no exaggeration to say that in the Western world, in the whole world, it is the norm for parents to send their children to school. However, if you are already on your home educating, homeschooling journey, then you will probably have already come to the awareness that there are many things about school that are indeed not normal and can in fact be damaging. This whole book is about the myth of things that are considered normal and how they can actually be far from what is best for us. So let's get into what Gabor Mate has to say about it. Our cultural ecology does not support attuned, present, responsive, connected parenting. Reinforced by educational systems that too often stress students with pressures to compete, the process culminates in the exploitation of children and youth for the glory of the consumer markets. Now, it's no secret that our education system does indeed stress students with pressures to compete. I think I spoke about this maybe in my video about the 5 reasons why I'm not sending my children to school, and it is my personal belief that there is far too much competition imposed within the school system, you know, for grades, for what set you're in. Are you in the top set? If you're not like top of the exam marks, then you're not going to get as far as your peers. And he does actually in this book mention Alfie Kohn, who I've talked about before. He has a book called No Contest, The Case Against Competition, which I'm yet to read, but sounds brilliant if I just read you a little bit of the extract. Contrary to accepted wisdom or norms, competition is not basic to human nature. It poisons our relationships and holds us back from doing our best. To me, that rings as completely true. As long as we're too focused on competing with other people, then that's always going to inevitably bring up toxic relationships. And essentially, it's, what did Gabor say again? For the glory of the consumer market. You know, that's what we're all being driven to compete, is to be able to feed into the capitalist consumer market by, you know, competing for the best jobs with the biggest salaries so we can afford the biggest houses and the fastest car. It starts from the minute we start school and start pitching kids against each other for academic glory, if you will. Next up, and this is one that I really particularly liked, he says, in cultures with their priorities in order, young friendships blossom in a community setting overseen by nurturing adults. In our society, peer interactions occur not in the context of protective adult relationships, but away from them. This is one of the things that me and a few other home ed mums were literally talking about the other day. I think there's a misconception with home educated children that we're always like on them, always just by their side the whole time. It's not the case. Like, they have plenty of opportunities to be off exploring their friendships while we sort of sit back and let some of that happen naturally, but that they know that we are always there on the sidelines if they need help in figuring out a conflict, if they hurt themselves, if someone is nasty to them. They know that they have that support network nearby, and I think that really helps them sort of let down their guards and not live in a state of perpetual kind of fear or anxiety, really. And obviously, like, there's some amazing teachers that help nurture friendships, but in classes of 30 plus students, it's not always going to be possible to be aware of everything that is going on in the social interactions. And personally, I think, especially, you know, my children are only 5 years old, I really think that they need that extra help to be able to navigate those sort of relationships and understand how to communicate with their peers, knowing that we're close by and they can always come to us for help if they need to the adults that understand them and love them the most. Okay, slightly further on into the book, Gabor was talking about the effect that COVID-19 had on the schools in his area. He's in, he was talking about Quebec in Canada, but I think this is pretty applicable to many places in the UK. And essentially, after lockdown, many of the schools omitted subjects that they deemed not as important as other subjects. So he says, the supposed non-essentials of music, drama, art and physical education. And the assumption was that academic subjects were more important. He raises the question then, more important than what? Prioritising job readiness is a far cry from foregrounding healthy development, which ought to be the primary agenda of the educational system, as of child rearing in general. Even on narrow skill building grounds, our prevailing educational ideologies miss the boat, since cognitive skills in fact depend on firm emotional architecture, of which play is an indispensable builder. Just about got through that one. But, you know, it's a really valid point that he made, and that happened, as far as I'm aware, there's a lot of schools in the UK doubled down on maths, science and English after COVID, and less time was put into the arts because of the assumption that they were more important. And again, I think Alfie Cohn's spoken on this. His sort of critique is that our government pushes those topics as more important because that is what fuels us as being one of, you know, the world leaders, because it's another reason, you know, all the STEM subjects are pushed, because it helps our country develop again ahead of others. It's all back down to, you know, competition. But who are we to say that the arts and music, and especially physical education, aren't equally as important, because they are what help develop our emotional intelligence. Play, as he says, is one of the most important things, and that is something that is hugely missing from our school system once you leave year R. I'm pretty sure kindergarten in the US is the same as reception year in the UK, but please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I just know reception sounds like a lot of fun. You do a lot of playing. The minute you enter year one, it's on to the academics, and you know that's all reserved for an hour's break time. Gabor Mate wrote another book alongside Gordon Newfield called Hold On To Your Kids, and he quotes Gordon again in this book from one of his talks in Brussels. "We used to think that schools built brains. Now we know that it is play that builds the brains that schools can then use. It's where growth most happens. True play is not outcome-based. The fun is in the activity, not the end result. Free play is one of the irreducible needs of childhood." And I know I'm guilty even of this in home education. Like, how many times have I tried to set up a play activity with the aim of, you know, teaching them some math? That's not the point of play. Play can't be set with an educational goal in mind more often than not. And there's time, I think, for that, but more often than not, play has to be the work of the child, as they say. It's something that we're not interfering in or trying to get some sort of learning outcome from, because they're learning more than we can ever really understand, I think, or more than we can put in place for them. Okay, moving on just to the next page. This chapter, interestingly, is called Forcing the Brain in the Wrong Direction. He begins to address the Finnish school system, which you may have heard me talk about before, or heard other people talk about, or know about yourself. His family experienced a stunningly stress-free and stunningly good school system. His 7-year-old son was placed in the youngest class because children younger than 7 don't receive formal academic training. Once in school, children get a mandated 15-minute outdoor recess break for every 45 minutes of class instruction. I mean, that really just blows the English system out of the water, really. And as far as outcomes of this go, Finland consistently ranks at or near the top of educational test scores results in the Western world, and has been ranked the most literate nation on earth. Children there aren't formally taught to read to at least 7, and yet they come out as the most literate nation on earth. Yet here we are panicking if a 5-year-old doesn't read, basically. And it's so hard to let go, because that's how, you know, anyone who's been brought up in the UK, or probably the US as well, has gone through that system. And it's hard to trust that our kids are going to be okay and even excel if we don't start sitting them down for phonics lessons at 4.5 years old. And Finland is a really good example of that. I wanted to bring you to this page where this wasn't necessarily Gabor Mate saying this, but he quotes, how do you say this? Noam Chomsky. I know this person is famous, but I don't know how to say the name. Anyway, they say, children are constantly asking why. True. They want explanations, they want to understand things. But soon, he says, you go to school, you're regimented, you're taught this is the way you're supposed to behave, not other ways. The institutions of the society are constructed so as to reduce, modify, limit the efforts and control of one's own destiny. I think I'll just leave that as it is. There's nothing much more to say about that. I think my child is waking up. Hey, I'm in here. Hey, darling. Oh, you just woke up, sorry. Yeah, okay. Just strategically placing the book here. In chapter 26, Gabor Mate addresses what he calls the 4 A's. The 4 A's that we need in order to, I suppose, develop emotionally healthily, and also the 4 A's that we need to meet in order to heal from any of our childhood traumas. The second A that he lists is agency, of which he says agency is the capacity to freely take responsibility for our existence, exercising responsibility in all essential decisions that affect our lives to every extent possible. Being deprived of agency is a source of stress. Now, I don't think it's an understatement to say that children, for the most part, are deprived of agency. Most of them don't get to freely take responsibility for their existence, and in some cases that isn't appropriate, but they certainly, for the most part, don't get the choice over whether they go to school or not, even in a lot of cases, even if they're heavily resisting going to school. You know, I'm sure you all will have heard of the term school refusers, you know, children who are crying out for various reasons, trying to say that this environment is not right for me, and in most cases they still don't really get the choice to not go to school. They just, you know, have special classes. You know, in some cases that's going to be because they're literally, it's not possible for the family because of work commitments or what have you. But a lot of the time it's because school is considered or seen as the norm. Listening to the fact that this child is saying, no, that's not normal for me, that's not, I can't cope in that environment under these stresses, and just having that agency removed from you, the ability to choose, is a source of stress that can last from childhood all throughout into adulthood as well. I thought this part was super interesting and something I didn't know about before. Not to say that, I mean, there's a lot of stuff I don't know about, but I'd never heard this before. And it's a chapter about self-limiting beliefs, which I know we all have, and how many of these beliefs come from things that we are told repeatedly during childhood. Apparently, delta waves, the brain's lowest frequency, predominate in our first 2 years, then theta waves ramp up until we're about 6. A child under 7 is predominantly in theta. Theta is a hypnotic state, and it's how you absorb all of this stuff for 7 years. Just as under the spell of a hypnotist, you would believe whatever messages you get. Now, obviously, I saw the mention of under 7 years old, and my mind instantly rang to the fact back to Finland and how they don't start formal academic learning until 7 years old. And I just thought, wow, like, a child under 7 is predominantly in Theta. Theta is a hypnotic state, and it's how you absorb all this stuff for 7 years. So we're sending our children from the age of 4.5 into a school system in this almost like hypnotic state where they are just literally primed to take on whatever messages we're putting into their brains. Like, that does not sound healthy to me. A child under 7 just isn't ready to start taking on that sort of academics, and they're at risk of just, you know, if we say, oh, a child is 5.5 and they can't read, so they're behind. That's the term that's used, isn't it, in schools? They're behind. And we're telling this child in their theta brainwaves that they're behind. Their biology is priming them to just believe this message of behindness, and that message then becomes very difficult to dislodge. And he says, only afterwards, after the age of 7, does the state of conscious awareness and logical thinking associated with alpha and beta wave activity come online. We download our perceptions and beliefs about life years before we acquire the capacity for critical thinking. I was like, we just, before the age of 7, we just don't have that conscious awareness, logical thinking, or capacity for critical thinking that is needed for academic study, or to distinguish between all these things that we're being told. Like, that was such a revelation for me, honestly. Like, like I said, I hadn't heard that before, and that blew my tiny brain. Sorry, that was completely all over the place. If you've managed to watch this far, I really appreciate it. I would love to do more sort of book reviews or books relating to home education. So if that is something that you're interested in, please give this video a like so I know that I'm on the right sort of track. And I really hope I've encouraged you to pick up that book. It was really a great read for me, but if not, just have a think about some of those things that I mentioned in relation to education, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Take care.